Every kaiju that comes through the breach is a redesign built by something on the other side, reading how we fought the last one. The scale that measures them runs from Category 1 to Category 5, and every jump up that ladder was paid for by a Jaeger crew who lost first and never got a second try. That's why today I'm breaking down all 5 kaiju in the franchise and what each one figured out about us. Starting with the monster that set the baseline every fight after it got measured against, Trespasser. One of the most consequential monsters in the entire war, carries the weakest rating on the books. There, I said it. Trespasser is the kaiju that started everything, and the classification scale still calls it a Category 1, the bottom rung of a system that climbs through V and beyond in the wider canon. That number sounds like an insult once you know what the creature actually did. It walked out of the breach and into San Francisco, and defense budgets were rewritten, maps redrawn, and military doctrines overhauled because of it. For the people in its path, Category 1 meant a ruined city and an enemy requiring nuclear weapons before the attack ended. The floor of the scale is shaped like this one animal, which is a strange thing to say about a system built to measure threat. The rating starts making sense when you look at what the Serizawa scale actually measures. Category is a threat metric built from a kaiju's water displacement, toxicity, and ambient radiation. Trespasser sits at Category 1 because those physical properties place it on the scale's lowest rung. Its place in invasion history is a separate fact. Trespasser came through the breach first. The classification measures the creature. The date marks the opening of the war. Damage to San Francisco explains its consequence, while the 3 nuclear missiles required to kill it explain why humanity suddenly needed a new answer. Trespasser also sits first in the original film's kaiju order, ahead of Knifehead, Otachi, Leatherback, and Slattern. That first place slot marks chronology, while Category 1 records physical threat. Keeping those labels separate matters, because one monster can open a global war while occupying the scale's lowest tier. Trespasser fought as the first kaiju humanity had cataloged, mapped, or engaged. Every monster that followed entered a world already measuring displacement, poison, and radiation, because this one had made contact first. That's the part worth sitting with. The instant somebody assigns Trespasser a number, the war stops being a single disaster and becomes a project with a scoreboard. A number creates a framework for the creature coming after it. Read as a theory, the early incursions look like the precursors opening a testing pipeline, with Trespasser as Test 1 and the breach as their delivery door. That is a deeply unpleasant amount of administration for an alien invasion. Community chronology debates around the invasion get messy fast. Fans argue about which sightings came first, how tie-in comics and games should slot into the film timeline, and whether certain early incursions predate the official record. Following one leap here rather than several, that noise sits on top of the one canon fact that anchors the debate. Trespasser opened the war. That fixed point supports the rest of the fan-built timeline, while the Serizawa scale judges each kaiju by what its body puts into the world. Trespasser faced conventional military forces along the coastline. 3 nuclear missiles finally killed it. 2 pilots entered this war later, when Brawler Yukon fought Karloff in 2015 during the first piloted Jaeger deployment. That sequence carries the human cost behind the clean Category 1 label. People watched an unprecedented attack survive the weapons they trusted, then built a machine that required 2 minds to share the terror. The spreadsheet came first. The drift came afterward, a category I establish as a floor, and later measurements climbed through higher categories as the kaiju grew more dangerous. The scale ranks threats through water displacement, toxicity, and ambient radiation. In practice, those rising numbers began to feel like a countdown, one new body stacking on the last as humanity waited to see how much worse the readings could get. Great! Add that to the apocalypse paperwork. The floor of the scale implied a ceiling, and humanity spent years getting comfortable holding that floor with machines built to punch back. Knifehead, the next kaiju shown in the film's opening montage, was engineered for close-quarters butchery, and it ended the idea that a category number tells you how a fight is going to go. Knifehead, 60 seconds. That's roughly how long some early cockpit footage suggests a Jaeger crew had before Knifehead closed the distance and made most of their training look irrelevant. Trespasser walked ashore as the very first data point on a chart that didn't exist yet, arriving into a world with 0 machines built to meet it, 0 doctrine written to counter it, and 0 sense of scale to measure it against. Knifehead arrived into a different world entirely, one that had already built an answer to the last monster, and it treated that answer like a rough draft. This is the kaiju that turns category from a number on a chart into a body count in a cockpit. The official story is simple. Bigger kaiju, bigger machine, problem solved. Humanity had already done the math after Trespasser, scaling up steel and tonnage to match a monster that walked in slow and heavy. Knifehead's whole design reads like it read that math and rejected it outright. That head is a wedge, built low and jagged, engineered to get inside a Jaeger's guard before the pilots finished their first exchange. Fans have landed on one comparison for that head, so often it's become one of the most recognizable fan descriptions. A goblin shark dragged up from a trench and given the mass of a building. The resemblance tracks. Goblin sharks hunt by getting shockingly close before a target registers the threat, and Knifehead's silhouette does the same job on a kaiju scale, all blade and no wasted motion. Pair that with jagged biomechanical plating across the skull and you get an image a lot of fans picture the second someone says, Pacific Rim Monster. It sits in the same core lineup as Otachi, Leatherback, Scunner, and Slattern, and it's one of the kaiju fans reach for first when they picture the franchise's early monster designs. The appearance order and the iconic status are locked, documented facts about the film and its place in the franchise. The biology comparison is a read on the silhouette, a strong one, but a read rather than a confirmed in-universe classification. It earns its confidence honestly. The low wedge skull, the ambush profile, and the jagged plating all point the same direction, and very little about the design pulls against it. A Jaeger is two pilots sharing one nervous system, which means a fight that collapses in the first minute collapses for both of them at once, wired into the same shared skull. One half of that pairing surviving the other still counts as a defeat, because the machine only ever worked as a matched set. Knifehead is the monster that proved that math the hard way, 60 seconds at a time, and the number stamped on its classification never once accounted for how fast a crew's first exchange could turn into their last. Humanity answered the way it always does after a lesson like that. Heavier machines, thicker armor, more tonnage stacked onto the frame. That's a fine solution for anything that has to reach you by walking, plodding forward the way Trespasser did, giving engineers time to measure the threat and build a response to match it. Alright, reasonable plan. Should have worked. Then came the arrival that made the entire defensive line look like a bad guess, because it refused to fight anywhere the maps said it should, and every ton of that new armor turned out to be the wrong kind of heavy for what was coming next. Otachi, Category 4. Officially, the first kaiju to emerge from the breach predates the rating system entirely. Otachi landed at Category 4, and between that first breach and Otachi, an entire escalation curve had already played out. That is a dramatic escalation, the kind that reads less like a sequel and more like a design team on the other side of the ocean floor throwing out 3 drafts and mailing back a finished product. Whoever greenlit this thing skipped the gentle ramp entirely and went straight for the deep end. The entire coastal defense grid was built on one assumption. Kaiju arrive by water, they hit the shield wall, and the wall holds or it doesn't. Engineers poured that assumption into steel and called it a strategy. Otachi treated that assumption as background noise and went straight over the top of it, which is the kind of sentence that should have shown up in an emergency briefing months earlier. Officially, the category rating tracks water displacement, toxicity, and ambient radiation. The same formula applied to every kaiju logged since the scale went into use. That number is supposed to tell the people behind the wall exactly what kind of fight they're walking into, down to the tonnage and the blast radius. It is a good system for measuring things that hit a wall. It says nothing about things that fly over one. Otachi emerges at Hong Kong alongside Leatherback, and the fight stops being a water problem almost immediately. Wings unfold from its back mid-battle, and it takes to open air over the city, turning a naval engagement into an air raid in the space of a few seconds. Gypsy Danger, crewed for the first time by Raleigh Beckett and Mako Mori, has to be lifted by transport helicopters just to reach altitude, and the kill shot ends up being a drop from the stratosphere instead of a punch. For 2 pilots wired into the same machine for the first time, that meant learning Otachi's rules in real time, with 0 margin for a second mistake, and a debut mission that doubled as a crash course in improvisation 50,000 feet above the water. Somewhere in the middle of that fight, Otachi also lays an egg that hatches a second kaiju mid-combat, which means the thing arrived with its own reinforcements built in. Add that to the tally, a Category 4 flyer that reproduces on the clock. In the original film, Otachi appears as half of the double event that follows the Knifehead prologue, paired with Leatherback, a pairing that fuels ongoing fan debates over which kaiju feels like the movie's real second threat. Reference databases file Otachi as core to the first film's roster, and once you see the flight path over the wall, it's obvious why that placement stuck. You could argue the wall's engineers looked at Trespasser and Knifehead and concluded the ocean was the battlefield. Knifehead answered the Jaegers directly, hunting one down and taking a pilot with it in a fight built machine against machine. A straightforward brawl by comparison. Otachi answered the map instead, treating the whole coastal shield network as a line drawn in the wrong place, and it did that one category higher than the Knifehead-class threats the wall was already struggling to stop. The Bat and Snake Red is widely cited across fan comparisons, and it holds up under its own evidence. Put the wings, the coiled serpent tail, the low predatory glide before a strike, and the egg laying together, and you get one of the strangest hybrid silhouettes the franchise ever produced. That consensus matters, because while Otachi's Category 4 rating is a Serizawa scale number, its real threat comes from versatility, a monster built to fly, swim, coil, and spawn, which is a scarier kind of upgrade than sheer size could ever manage on its own. Somewhere in a design log on the other side of the breach, whoever pitched this kaiju solved for unpredictability, and the fix was a body that stopped moving like anything the wall was built to stop. A creature that swims, flies, coils, and reproduces mid-battle doesn't fit inside a single defensive posture, and that's exactly the point of building one. Most category numbers before Otachi described kaiju that met defenses head-on. A battering ram, a boarding party, a straight line at the shield. This one told the wall nothing useful at all, because the same rating that measured a battering ram now had to measure a thing that could fly over the ram's entire strategy and drop a second monster on the way down. Here is the part that should worry anyone reading the scale as a warning system. One identical rating can hide two completely different problems, a fact the wall's engineers were about to learn the hard way, and the other kaiju arriving in that same stretch of the war won fights by overwhelming whatever stood in the way, whether by brute force or by shutting it down entirely. Leatherback ambushes Striker Eureka from behind in the middle of Hong Kong Bay and releases an area effect electromagnetic pulse from a specialized organ on its back, shutting the Jaeger down. One move, one Jaeger disabled. Many kaiju take combined tactics to bring down, and Leatherback does it with a single burst. That ambush sits on the exact same rating card as the flying acid spitter from the last chapter of this story. Leatherback and Otachi both carry the identical Category 4 classification, arriving in the same stretch of fighting, which means the scale treats a gorilla-built battering ram and an airborne chemical weapon as functionally the same threat. Same card, wildly different resume. The official version of Category 4 is a size and threat estimate based on water displacement, toxicity, and ambient radiation levels, a rough line the Pan-Pacific Defense Corps drew to sort kaiju by danger. On paper, that sounds tidy. A single number, a clean tier, easy to brief a pilot on before he climbs into a machine worth more than most countries. In practice, that same number puts a monster that flies, spits corrosive acid, and kills with surgical precision on the same line as a monster that plants 2 legs, tanks incoming fire, and demolishes Jaegers through sheer mass. One digit is carrying the weight of 2 completely different threat profiles, and that digit alone gives pilots zero indication of what specific abilities to expect. Fans frequently reach for one comparison, and it fits. Leatherback reads as a gorilla. Hunched shoulders, knuckle-dragging gait, a chest built like a shipping container stacked on legs. That silhouette is why many fans treat it as pure tonnage, the kaiju that tends to come up when the conversation turns to raw physical power instead of tactics. Otachi kills like a specialist working with a scalpel. Leatherback hits like a wrecking ball that happens to have a spine, and in the very same battle it proves that reputation with brutal efficiency. It ambushes Striker Eureka from behind and fires the EMP burst from its back-mounted organ, knocking the Jaeger completely offline after Otachi has already torn through Crimson Typhoon. That fight cost real people something the classification scale never bothers to count. The Wei-Tang triplets, 3 pilots wired into one machine, went into Hong Kong carrying whatever intelligence the Corps could provide and learned Otachi's abilities in real time. The film keeps their briefing materials off screen, leaving the category number as the clearest information the audience sees them receive. Crimson Typhoon lost the fight before the second Jaeger even arrived on scene. Fans debate which of the pair wins a straight matchup, and the argument often circles back to the same split. Otachi ends pilots, Leatherback ends Jaegers. The film leaves their raw threat ranking open, so what follows is a read of the evidence on screen rather than a verdict the movie hands down for you. Line up the damage each one does in its own scene, and the pattern tips toward Leatherback as the bigger tank. The kaiju built to absorb everything a Jaeger throws at it and keep swinging until the Jaeger stops moving entirely. Otachi wins through precision. Leatherback wins through an EMP organ powerful enough to shut Striker down before raw endurance even becomes the deciding factor. 2 monsters, 1 rating, dropped into the same week of the same war. Set that next to a single specialist working alone, and the specialist starts looking like a fluke, a one-off with a lucky skill set. Set it up as a pair instead, and it reads like 2 branches of one experiment, tested in the field at the same time, each one built to solve a different half of how humans fight back against these things. The Corps' paperwork presented on screen never spells out that reading. The timing does the arguing instead. 2 Category 4s, 1 battle, 1 city, arriving together on purpose. The number on that classification card estimated size and threat level through water displacement, toxicity, and ambient radiation. It said 0 about which kaiju killed with acid and which one carried a specialized EMP organ on its back, and the crews who found out the difference paid for that gap with the fight itself, in real time, with whatever warning their briefing materials provided proving insufficient. 2 at once was the experiment. What follows an experiment is a conclusion, and the classification scale still had one number sitting at the top of it that nobody alive had ever seen filled in. Slattern, Category 5. That is the number stamped on Slattern's classification card, and it sits at the highest rating the kaiju threat scale reached during the entire war captured in the first film. Every kaiju that walked out of the breach before it was a draft. Slattern is the version that shipped. The scale started small. It began as a report card for one monster, the first kaiju to reach San Francisco Bay, rated Category 1 in what looks like a starting benchmark for a threat nobody had measured before. 5 kaiju and 1 full classification jump later, Slattern arrives carrying a rating that took the entire war to earn. Trespasser earned that Category 1 by teaching the other side of the breach exactly what humanity would answer with: tanks, missiles, and eventually a nuclear warhead detonated at point-blank range. The kaiju that followed solved that answer at close range, built with a hide and a fighting style designed to out-wrestle a Jaeger inside its own reach. The one after that solved the reach problem a different way, adding wings and a jet of corrosive acid so the fight never had to touch the ground at all. Then came the pair. 2 Category 4 kaiju, one built for the air and one built like a demolition crew, sent through the breach together and timed to hit Hong Kong in the same hour, so a single Jaeger crew never got to fight either monster alone. Slattern's file backs its reputation with specifics. It stands taller than every kaiju that came before it in the first film, carries 3 horns where Knifehead settled for 1, and is strong enough to grapple a Jaeger and keep grappling through explosions that would have ended the fight against any earlier monster. It is also the kaiju Gypsy Danger drags into the breach itself at the climax, meaning Slattern's entire resume ends with getting detonated by a nuclear warhead inside the tunnel its own side built. Every kaiju on that ladder lost. Every loss got measured, filed, and used by whoever sits on the other side of the breach designing the next entry. Slattern carries Category 5 as if that file was finally complete. That filing costs something every time it happens. 2 pilots wired into the same machine learn a kaiju's rules by losing to it first, and the Pan-Pacific Defense Corps spreads that data across every Shatterdome so the next crew studies the tape instead of starting blind. The crews who fought Trespasser bought the data that built the kaiju after it. The crews who fought the paired Category 4s bought the data sitting inside Slattern's design. In a sense, the number on Slattern's classification card doubles as a tally of every Jaeger crew who survived long enough to teach the precursors something useful. Picture the radio chatter from that fight. It's got a third horn. Why does it have a third horn? Followed by focus. We have one shot at this. That panic is the entire war in miniature. 5 kaiju in, and the crews are still discovering new problems mid-punch. No character ever speaks Slattern's name on screen, but the shape does the talking anyway. A wide, flattened head built like a hammerhead shark, 3 horns doing the work many kaiju spread across an entire face. Overkill was clearly on the table. Arms shaped for grappling instead of swinging. Fans keep landing on Hammerhead as the closest real-world match, and once the comparison clicks, every other guess feels like a downgrade. Picture the size difference. Trespasser was already large enough to wade through a harbor, and Slattern is built to make that harbor look like a bathtub. That silhouette is why Slattern shows up first in many rankings of the franchise's strongest kaiju and frequently tops weakest to strongest lists built around the first film. The reputation holds because the film hands Slattern the raw size to match Trespasser and then the firepower of 3 horns instead of 1, and the job of closing the first film's kaiju roster as the last thing standing between the breach and its own detonation. Ask a room full of fans to name the boss monster of the original Pacific Rim, and plenty of them land on the same 3-horned head, because Slattern has spent years working as the benchmark the heavy hitters that followed the franchise get measured against. Rank the kaiju from weakest to strongest, and Slattern consistently sits at or near the top. Ask which kaiju could beat Slattern in a straight fight, and plenty of answers reach past the first film entirely, into the sequel's roster, which is the surest sign Slattern set the ceiling everyone else gets checked against. Slattern earned Category 5 because its size, power, and the accumulated combat data pushed the scale to its highest tier, size and speed, and a fighting style assembled out of 5 separate kaiju's failures. The Jaeger crews who fought and lost between Trespasser and the paired Category 4s paid a price that contributed to Slattern's design, and none of them got a say in what their loss became. Trespasser walked out of the breach carrying a single question: what does humanity have? Slattern walked out carrying the answer: 5 kaiju and every Jaeger crew who paid to draft it. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.